Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise today.
I am pleased to be able to rise and speak to the subject of the Bill C-15 regarding the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. This is another bill that is part of the framework of legislation to try to deal with the pandemic caused by COVID-19, a situation we've never seen before.
And we're seeing level after level of and aspect after aspect of debate taking place in this place for different pieces of legislation to rush to fill the gaps. There are a few things to say about this, but before I do, I want to acknowledge that I'm honored to speak today on the territory unceded of the Algonquin Nation and express to them our enormous thanks for patience and generosity. Miigwech. We're in the midst of something that we can say is unknown to us. I was very taken with the analysis by the Parliamentary Budget Office, and I want to speak to that for just a moment, because I think for a lot of Canadians, I know I'm hearing from some constituents who are saying, well, yes, we need all the help we can get right now in this pandemic, but who's going to pay the bills for all this? What are we going to do when the bills fall due? And I think it's important to just take a moment. I've been privileged to also be able to participate on the Finance Committee meetings, to be able to ask questions of the Bank of Canada Governor, Steve Poloz. He and his team have done an amazing job. And to have an insight into what governments all around the world are doing, and to let Canadians know we're certainly not alone in this. I think it's obvious that we're not alone in fighting the public health crisis that is COVID-19. But we're also not alone in deciding that there's certain prescriptions for an economy that will help us all. I don't think Canadians have noticed the absence of certain things, but let me just say that there's an absence of things that we wouldn't want to see, like runs on the bank. We're not seeing people lining up saying, I better get my money out right now, I don't trust the system. We're not seeing people saying, I can't make my credit card bills because of usury levels of interest rates that have been hiked up. We've seen rates that are supposed to be going down, but a lot of these things that we're seeing are the results of very specific prescriptions that are being followed not just by the Bank of Canada, but by central banks around the world. To colleagues and friends here, I recommend the International Monetary Fund review of what's going on. The trillions of dollars that are being spent by governments around the world are in a sense backstopped by monetary policy that says we can get through this. We have to do a couple of things. We're going to ramp down interest rates to as close to zero as possible, so the cost of borrowing goes down. We're going to introduce more liquidity into the system with a number of measures, including for the Bank of Canada, buying federal bonds, buying provincial bonds in the billions and billions of dollars. Buying bonds by our central bank doesn't add to debt or deficit. It increases liquidity and keeps cash in the system so that we don't have a credit crunch. It's important to know that we've been through situations where things were much worse for our financial picture than now. Even when we get through this, after all the money that's planned to be spent, our debt to GDP ratio will be nowhere near as bad as it was in the early 90s. So again, the International Monetary Fund report, the Parliamentary Budget Office reports, no one's sanguine about this, but both, if you read the International Monetary Fund reports and you read the Parliamentary Budget Office report, as a Canadian, you're left knowing this. We're not in this alone. The measures taken by central bank, by the finance minister, by the government so far are not putting us in financial peril. And one of the things we don't mention enough is that we're in a very privileged position. This was an analogy used by Steve Poloz when he was speaking to the Finance Committee, that just as COVID-19 will be much harder for people who have underlying health conditions, who don't go into this situation healthy, so too are nation states more at risk when they don't go in healthy. We're in a privileged position. Our debt to GDP ratio was the lowest in the G7 when this hit. We had historic levels of employment. We were certainly, my living memory, the closest thing to full employment I've ever seen in Canada. This is what the governor of the Bank of Canada meant when he talked about fiscal firepower. The finance ministers used the same term, fiscal firepower. It's not to say that this isn't a deep economic crisis which has befallen us, along with a deep public health care crisis which has befallen us, but just to say that it's not piling on debt, it's a deficit for sure, but just as the PBO suggested, when spending is temporary, such as it is now, we would most likely expect to bounce back, as we did at the end of the Second World War with a large surplus in 1947, but only if certain conditions are upheld. One is, we need to hold the country together. I'm so grateful to every province. When I hear the Deputy Prime Minister saying how there are weekly calls with every Premier of every province and territory with the Prime Minister, this is a very healthy thing. I think it's very important that no matter how much sparring is going on today when we're meeting in person, behind the scenes, I know there's tremendous collaboration. And no one party can claim credit for things. I think that, yes, the Greens advocated that 10% wasn't enough. We had to have 75% in the wage subsidy. And that was done. I think that's a credit to all of us in this place, those who came to it more slowly and those who advocated first. We have to work together or we won't get through this. So back to where we are in terms of our financial position, I'm hoping we don't bounce back in the sense that we go to an economy such as we had before, which had glaring inequities. I hope we bounce forward and that when the pandemic is over, we look at an economic prescription for the country that's consistent with the urgency of the climate crisis, that's consistent with getting people back to work, but doing things like retrofitting our buildings to make sure that we maximize energy efficiency, even that every building could produce more energy than it uses. That's doable. That we have an electricity grid that works as a national energy corridor, east to west, north to south, and is 100% renewable energy. There's things that we can do that we can come out of this crisis with, again, closer to full employment and with less social inequity, with clear action to ensure our seniors are well housed and well cared for, with clear action to make sure that we don't have a social safety net full of holes, but that it's repaired and that we move towards guaranteed livable income. I just made a note of the most recent book title that came to my attention, and I commend it to my friends in the Conservative Party because it was written by a Conservative. Senator Hugh Siegel's new book is out, and it's called Bootstraps Need Boots: One Tory's Lonely Fight to End Poverty in Canada. I would love to see that fight be less lonely. And I thank our former parliamentary colleague, former Senator Hugh Siegel, for bringing forward a book at a time when the topic of guaranteed livable income, or also called universal basic income, has never been as hot a topic. I'll pause parenthetically because my recent exchange with the Honourable Member for London Fanshawe, the fact that I say guaranteed livable income and others say universal basic income, we've adopted as Greens the term guaranteed livable income because we want to make sure that the amount that every Canadian receives actually creates a situation in which they find their situation livable and not beyond some level of poverty from which they are moderately better off than they were before. So that's a debate for another day.